Welcome to the Grab Lives podcast, everyone. I'm your host, John Vargas. Thank you for listening. If you can help our cause by liking, subscribing, and following our page on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple, really helps the algorithm kind of move forward and getting this episode that could be helpful for one person across the nation who's in this field of work or any other nations. I know people have listened in Australia and Europe to this podcast platform. And remember, this is not just a podcast platform designed for first responders. It's also for humanity. I think there's a lot of conversations on here and pieces that are really opening up like a conversation around human consciousness and human behavior. So thank you everyone for listening. I really appreciate you. This is an honor to be a host on this podcast platform and just to open everyone's hearts to the ideas of old paradigms that don't work, old structures that are falling apart. So thank you. Just to start off without a disclaimer, everything we say on doing this podcast platform does not support the views or the opinions of the City of Los Angeles Fire Department. So for today's guest, I have Matt Thierfelder, who is a retired Battalion Chief from Vancouver Fire Department over in Washington State. So his perspective on retirement is a great podcast episode for those who are about to retire or who have hit retirement, because there's been a cluster of members who have struggled with leaving this career and then they don't know what to do with themselves. They lose this sense of identity and they are struggling. But there's not much talked about with these members and these groups of people. And so this is a great stimulated conversation around constructs and ideas, and also what Matt had done for his own healing journey, which was introducing psilocybin that was therapeutic and working with a group of people to find his own path. And ultimately, we can have guides, we can have teachers, we can have mentors, but in the end, we have to do our own healing. It takes two to tango, as I've mentioned in the past. And if you don't do your own work, you can get really stuck. So I hope this is a great episode for everyone, really. And I've really been opened up with psychedelic medicine as an alternative treatment. But, I've seen so many people and so many stories with people using this as a tool, and to remember that it is a tool for a healing journey. It is not a magic bullet. It is not something that can be that can also be abused and also heavily over-identified with. So I hope people just understand the safety around this and the structure on how we're looking forward to reintroduce new paradigms with new medicines that are therapeutic and are helpful, given with the science, given with the background, and given with the ultimate ability to turn someone's life around with giving new light, new perspective, new meaning with seeing the truth underneath the veil. So thank you for everyone for listening to this episode. I love you guys. Take care.
It's time for Grab Lives.
All right, Matt, we're recording, man.
Nice.
I'm here with Matt Thierfelder, and I love when people send me guests, and Matt was someone who had kind of got connected through someone who I'm gonna have later down the road with the podcast. So Matt's got an interesting story, and what I wanted to talk about with Matt is first his story, and then Matt's retired, and we kind of wanted to focus on retirees and their functionality after the job and what happens with that process. It's a very strange experience, and I know when I was going through some peer support group training, there were a couple of retirees, and they felt like they needed to be a voice for first responders, because there's just a strange different sliver of this experience for them, And I'd love for Matt first. Let's introduce yourself. Where are you coming from, man?
I'm in Vancouver, Washington, just right across the Columbia River from Portland. Uh, just retired New Year's Eve last year. Worked almost 31 years with the city of Vancouver.
Yeah, I mean, dude. So a lot of people now these days they're saying 20 years and out for a lot of different departments because the thing the sands of time have shifted where call volume in every single city is way higher and the rest times we have are less. So a lot of people are fixated on this 20 years and out idea, this claim that they're just going to do that. But for someone who's doing 30 years, I mean, that's a super, like a big chunk of time of your life, and I think people who do make it to 30 years, it's pretty extraordinary. And when you make it to that finish line per se, right, in quotation marks, it feels good. And but the question is like, what's next? You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I came up with that, and I was like, "Yeah, what's next?" I remember one of the retired guys telling me he remembers the first couple of years really good, and the last couple and everything in the middle was kind of a blur. And I feel that way too. I don't know how I worked 30 years. We got, like you said, we got busier and busier. I live and work in the same neighborhood, and I have for 30 years. If I go out my front door and walk down the street in the wintertime, I can see the station that I worked at. And that's just kind of total immersion. I was kind of always at work, seemed like.
That's interesting. I would never live in the city of LA. I always told myself that.
I
But I
love,
mean, that's amazing.
yeah, I love our neighborhood. It's a great city, and I don't think I'd do anything different. But yeah, coming up to retirement was kind of, like kind of what next? And I found myself, probably around year 25, I had really started kind of isolating and not doing a lot of the things that I enjoyed. And just kind of the only thing I was doing was waiting to go back to work. And I really liked work, but the, the feel good that I got from work were shorter and shorter increments over time. And I just was burnt out. I was tired. And, but I didn't know how to retire. And I kind of felt like I was quitting or giving up or saying I couldn't do it anymore, but I was just retiring. It was a beginning and end to everything. And it was just time. But once I got there, it seemed a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And retired guys would kind of come up and, "Hey, how you doing?" What do you mean? And they'd kind of tell me some of their struggles. And I was surprised because nobody really talks about it. And guys were just isolated and not doing anything, not talking to people. And I thought, man, I don't want to do that. I don't want to retire and then not be part of that group and not have anything to do and just be totally isolated, which I see a lot of people doing.
Yeah, I think there's so much to break down with this, and I'm very happy to have you on, brother. Like it's a great topic of conversation. And I think one of the things is, especially for I know from our department, uh we have men and women chasing an identity and that revolves around your reputation on the job, your reputation at this job. And they will take that identity and just all the way till retirement. And then they've been so attached to this persona, this mask, that it's a falsehood of who they really are. And that can be damaging and devastating to someone when they do retire because no one gives a shit once you retire. Like that reputation no longer matters. And there's been these stories where guys will retire and they want to come back and visit stations, but guys are like, "Hey, get out of here!" Like, no one knows who you are, no one knows anything about this reputation and your legacy you've worked so hard for. And I think that's what can become so devastating for some because of the blood, sweat, and tears, lack of a better term, they've put into themselves, and like this version of who they believe they're supposed to be has just crumbled. And so once you just snip that off, it's like snipping uh like an appendage or amputate your leg. Like the body will still function without that part of your body. So that's kind of what's going on. But like you have this large attachment to that part of your body that you're like, well, what the heck? Like, yeah, I feel like something's missing, something's off. So, but the rest of the journey must go on. And so that is something I really love to hear your concept and the way you've perceived that.
Well, I think when you retire, like there's a big hole left there. And I was the typical firefighter. You could tell I was a firefighter because I was wearing a firefighter t-shirt, firefighter hat. And I really bought into it and loved it. But towards the end of my career, I didn't want to constantly always be identified as a firefighter. I thought there's got to be a little bit something more than just one dimensional firefighter. And then getting closer to retirement, I'm like, well, what now? What am I going to do now? Everybody always asks, well, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, what am I doing? And I'd kind of gotten to the point where I didn't really feel like doing much, and I was just burnt out and tired. And I think probably the most important thing that I would urge people retiring is just to be around people and talk to somebody. Find one person you can trust and talk to them, and talk to them about anything, everything. Like nothing should be off limits. But you just find one person that you can trust to talk to. Guys usually don't talk about anything of significance.
Mm.
Why would you want to bring up things that you don't want to talk about? So I think just being part of a community outside of the fire department. I didn't realize I didn't really have any friends outside of the fire department. And the idea of like making a new friend as an adult male was very foreign to me. I was like, not interested. Don't trust people. I feel like I'm always competing with guys, the whole, kind of alpha culture of competition and constant sparring. I was just really, really tired of it. And it's been nice to be retired and like have some community outside the fire department and have some new friends outside of the fire department and to be social and be doing stuff like that was key for me. So I talked to people that said, yeah, like those first couple of years I retired, I just sat in my basement and drank for a year. And I'm like, why didn't you call somebody or why didn't you say something like that? The whole time we're working during our career, we don't do anything alone. None of our biggest challenges are done alone. And then we retire and, you're not feeling good or you're depressed or, whatever's making you drink or sit in your basement alone. And you're going to do that by yourself and not reach out to anybody. And I identify with that too, because there were times when I was, struggling or not doing well, the definition of anxiety and depression, but I didn't want anybody to know.
Mm.
I'd rather die than have anybody know like what I was going through, just out of, pride and ego, show no weakness. So,
Yeah, totally, man. I mean, I can speak from personal experience when you get injured. It's a very similar kind of experience with that. And I know anyone else who's been injured for a long time, while they're on the job, they go through that same cycle of being severed from your tribe, and you're in some type of isolation and recovery with your body, but there's a version of you that just, once you have that clean cut and you're not at the station, you're not having the same routine. And that can be a very interesting experience for some because everyone's different too. And everyone kind of they compartmentalize things differently as well. And I would say the way it was explained to me by a LAPD detective, he was kind of coaching me during my own process because he's been injured. He knew what it felt like, and he gave me this story about huskies and when they're pulling the sled. And he was telling me like, this is the same exact experience what you're having. So let me tell this story. So huskies, when they are pulling the sled, what happens is that's all they know. They've been trained and programmed to do that since birth. So dogs are pack animals. So they require this connective state with themselves. So sometimes a husky will, you know, stick its paw or something like that within a ditch or a rut, and they will break their ankle or their paw. So what happens is when they're going in through repair, they will watch I'm talking about the husky that's watching the herd or the pack pull the sled still. The husky will run with the pack still, even though it's injured, and will actually do it until death because that's all it knows. And so sometimes some Eskimo tribes who've done this for a really long time, they'll actually kill the husky that's injured because they know what's going to happen. They'll save its grief. So, the same thing for us where we're pack animals and we require something like this connection, a deep connection. We're programmed to work together. Like when you're going through the drill tower or the fire academy or the police academy or boot camp, we all know we merge as a unit, and we can only merge as far as the weakest link within that unit. So we've accustomed ourselves to thinking that way, and we just grow through that state. And it became such a great, fascinating concept for me because I had to pull myself out of the context that, first of all, I'm broken and I'm weak for even feeling the emotions I was experiencing and the depression I was experiencing. And most of people will go to alcohol as a way to treat those symptoms or those experiences they're having. And that's all we know because that's what we would cope with. Like when we're getting off shift, we go and drink with the boys, or whatever it is. And so those coping mechanisms just they don't really work very well. So there has to be some type of education or some type of way to shift your perspective when you're in that state. And for retirees, like I think that's very common. I don't know how many times I've heard of guys retiring and they drank themselves to death. So that's one portion I would love people to just really understand, like the compassion for retirees, especially in these types of jobs where their tribe is everything to them. You know, I did want to kind of shift though into the idea of burnout because for me, I've definitely identified burnout as different layers of it. Everyone goes through their job and their career with burnout, and it means so many different things for them. I think for myself, I've labeled burnout being different degrees. Like I've reached burnout where it was like DEFCON 10 burnout. Like I am just done. I'm so burnt out and I'm over it. Like I don't even want to think about firefighting or think about my job. And I know I've gotten these small little moments of time leading up to that burnout. Those were the moments I needed to really fixate and focus on. Because if I stop myself at those little moments of burnout, then I won't reach that catastrophic DEFCON 10 burnout. Does that make sense?
Yeah, burnout. Burnout's a real thing, and I was burnout, and I didn't really know what was wrong with me, but I was irritable and angry, and I kind of felt like everybody was against me, and I was just exhausted. I hadn't slept for most of my adult life. I was just so hyper vigilant and so on all the time and shift work, and we'd count calls after midnight, and the stations I worked at were always good for at least two or three or four or five calls, and then one right at shift change, and you just never recover. And I quit going home and sleeping because then I was either asleep or at work, and I'm like, this sucks. I'm either at work or asleep, and so you get burnt out. And then if you start thinking about what the chief's doing or what the department's doing, and you don't like that, and you can get burnt out and have have a lot of animosity where you might not need it, but your whole life is just the fire department. And I think people I see that struggle with burnout the most is they don't have a lot else going on in their life. And so when there's a change at the fire department, it's a really big deal to them because that's their whole ecosystem. If you change a guy, I remember hearing a talk from a doctor that they came into a little mental health talk, and he talked about this guy that's just putting my time in, and just here to piss off the chief, and I'm, just putting my time in, and This is the guy that his wife would ask, like, what color do you want to paint the bathroom? He goes, I don't care, whatever color you want. But if you came into the fire station and somebody painted the day room or something, you go, who picked this color? This is the stupidest thing. No, nobody asked me. And so it seemed really lopsided, where your whole, yeah, you're like you were talking about, your whole persona and everything about you is wrapped up in the fire department. And I think that's pretty dangerous, especially when you're looking at retiring, because you're not going to be on the roster, on the team anymore. And like, what are you going to do? I mean, besides, vacation. That's what everybody does. Go take a vacation and then ask what they're doing. And it's like, not much. You better have something to do when you retire. I mean, I think better have like a passion, a purpose, some hobby that makes you feel like you're contributing to life and, helping others, like something that the reason you get up in the morning, I think that's so important.
Yeah, that's so well put, man. And yeah, I just want just the idea of requiring a purpose to feel like you exist is also like a belief system. So like just wrapping your head around that too can be somewhat devastating. So I love to challenge people in their thinking around things. Like purpose is just you're chasing that. And the moment you continue to chase that and you're still feeling unfulfilled, there's something going on, because, and that goes across the board with Western culture. And so I challenged myself through some people who gave me certain challenges. They're like, hey, what if you don't have to do anything? Can you feel comfortable with that? And that shook me to my core, to where I started to introduce the fact that I don't need to do anything to feel comfortable in my skin. And that can be one of the most challenging things for people, for folks who are in the Western world, and especially for those who are working within this field, because we go to work and we have to do something. Like this busy work, strange experience you're having, like where you feel like you're purposeful and your worth is by doing busy work in the firehouse. And guys are crazy about this at LAFD. Like they'll just shine the diamond plate like crazy, when diamond plate's just like all it's for, it's supposed to be worn out. And we will shine it like crazy, especially these really busy locations like Skid Row and like downtown by MacArthur Park. And yeah, there's some sort of pride for your apparatus, but this busy work, strange programming it's going to affect you when you're at home. Like just being at home to do nothing is a skill. And I hope people can like just shift their attention on the fact that if you cannot sit still and feel comfortable in your skin, there's some work to be done around that. So shifting our mindset around some of these weird nuances that are not ingrained within the Western world is something we have to honor and respect, because they challenge this paradigm. And then we will start reaching for alcohol. Then we will start reaching for these other things because we want to self-soothe and make ourselves feel comfortable in our skin. Like most people feel comfortable in their skin and can sit still once they have a drink of alcohol, because it's a depressant. It makes you feel slowed down. Like you feel, oh, this relief. I can just finally like just relax. But the challenge is not having to use substances to get to that state to where you can feel relieved by just yourself, being yourself, doing nothing. And that can be really, really cumbersome for people. And I was going to add this to the picture here. If you're not watching YouTube, but I loved this picture that came out recently, and there's this image basically of this guy pulling off these masks that he wears within himself. And the last image is this guy pulling off, essentially a mask of anger, grief, and then underneath all that is this scared little boy. Mm-hmm. And he's just crawled up in a fetal position, face in the corner. And in the end, that's really all we are, is just unprocessed grief and sadness and a lack of acknowledgement of who we truly are, which is this small little scared little boy that's inside of us. And he needs that recognition, he or she, depending on if you're a woman listening to this, because I've been helping some women recently who've dealt with the same issues. And I just want people to just recognize and honor the fact that we are scared at the core of us, the core of who we really are. And it takes time to recognize that and really discipline to see what's really under the surface. And when I was going through my career, I used to get so nervous around some of these old dogs in the station and timid around how they would respond, how I would people please them in order to get their affection and their acknowledgement. But I shifted something one time when I was at the kitchen table and I was like, dude, this is like a zoo. And in the end, like all these people are just scared little boys. And that changed my confidence within myself when I recognized that. I was like, they're just acting like these scared little kids. And so when I would give presentations and drills, I would just visualize everyone in the room as little kids. And that really helped me gather that confidence within myself because I saw the truth of it all. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the louder somebody is, the more insecure they are. The guy that's always yelling and screaming about right and wrong, like they're a little unbalanced. And I definitely like to go back to what you're saying about not having to do something. And when I retired, I was really struggling with, I need to do something tangible. When people ask me what I'm doing, like I need to be able to say something, and it better be good. It better be at least as good as, being a battalion chief. And like, there wasn't a lot. And I was struggling with, am I not contributing? Am I not doing enough? And I've kind of gotten over that. And it's kind of nice just to take a nap and do nothing. And, just to be at the house and to just be, go do a hobby, go do something. It's so nice to not feel like I have to produce something or compete against myself or compete against, a couple hundred other guys for, whatever project promotion. It's like, it's nice to get off of that treadmill of constantly, the fire department's the only job where if you just come to work and you do your job and you do a good job, well, it's not really good enough. We'd like to see a little bit more. And if you keep putting your hand out, they will fill it up until you break, and then you'll say, I can't do it. And you'll slough your plate off, and they'll just put an email out looking for the next program coordinator or whatever, like be careful putting your hand out because it adds up. But I definitely think I suffered from I need to produce something in retirement, and there really wasn't anything. It took me a while to kind of come to that realization too. It's just be happy doing what you're doing today. I hate the be present, and just breathe. I think if I hear that one more time, I'm going to vomit. But I really struggled with just being content doing anything. Like I couldn't sit still, and I was always looking for whatever was next or planning for whatever was next. And I missed out on a lot doing that because you're never anywhere. You're always thinking about something else.
Yeah, I think everyone's sick of the therapist that shows up at these mental health like conferences or whatever, and they just say you need to breathe and be present. And all of us go up in arms, like, what the hell? Like, what do you mean by that? And they'll say you just need to be mindful in mindfulness practices, and it's like we will go crazy with that concept. But I think the hard part is it's not broken down enough for people, and it's just the fact that we don't understand really what mindfulness is. Even the person explaining that therapist, I bet you that therapist does not even understand what mindfulness is. They're just, regurgitating that information because it's been helpful for other people. So, like going into the context of just knowing how the mind operates, and it's really integrated within our Western world essentially, because we will try to problem solve like this mind solar panel or whatever it is. It's just like constantly scanning over and over and over and over. And that hypervigilance is something that needs to be talked about more because hypervigilance is high functioning anxiety. And high functioning anxiety is essentially for us in our job, we're problem solvers. So when we're constantly searching for problems, what are you going to find? Problems. So that's exactly it. So just having general awareness. And I want people to understand like awareness is a superpower. When you're watching yourself constantly scanning, you're like, whoa, I'm scanning too much right now. That gives you the moment to have the conscious effort to stop it where it's at. And just the recognition of that itself is power because you can see that there's a pattern that's happening. It's been happening at a subconscious level or even a conscious level for years or even a lifetime. So I'd say to replace mindfulness and being like being in the present and using your breath, yeah, those are great concepts, but more so awareness of a pattern is really where to start. And then also, when you see patterns over time, you start to see cycles that are occurring. And these cycles are actually really where the real work and transformation comes. Because when you can break a cycle, that's where evolution takes place. That's where a new you emerges from a cycle because these things have been happening at an unconscious level. So I'm sure that that makes sense, right? If I were to explain that rather than saying, "Hey, you need to be present and breathe," that makes more sense for a firefighter because we just don't know. And I think if you have the guidance for someone who's going to explain it to you, it makes more sense. But for us, we are geared to fix things. That's what we do. When we go to work, they call us to fix shit. That's what we do.
Uh,
So we want to fix stuff all the time. And when it comes down to our own healing journey, we will now use this healing journey as like this this end game when the healing journey there is no end game. So we will now fixate on the end game of, oh, I need to heal myself. There's something wrong with me. There's this problem with me. And in the end, it's not about that. It's not about trying to fix everything. Sometimes things just are. And when you come to that realization within yourself, you can have peace because you can just have feel comfortable for who you are.
yeah, I went to a lot of mental health talks, and we've got a great peer support team. And I remember hearing these. A lot of the things didn't resonate with me at first, or when I was younger. But as time went on, and kind of towards the end of my career, I started like making connections with things that I'd heard, about hypervigilance. And the one thing I noticed, and I just could not get over it, was I could not watch a motorcycle pass me on the freeway without plan out what's going to happen if he crashes in front of me, or what I'm going to have to do, or what if we're in the station. It was like that was every time a motorcycle passed me. And there was a lot of little things I was starting to notice like that. I was like, I don't think that's normal. And and, and the hypervigilance is just exhausting because you're constantly thinking about, what could be the worst thing that could happen right now. I distinctly remember being at a retreat in Mexico, had a campfire, everybody's having a good time, and it's really windy, and a couple branches came down, and I was the only one looking back because I kept thinking like there's going to be a big branch that comes out of this tree and kills somebody, but like I just realized I was constantly always kind of looking for what could be the worst possible thing that's going to happen next, which is helpful when you're at work, but it's not helpful every day in your day-to-day life. It's too much. And when I started to unpack that, I'm like, wow, everything's a little bit too loud. The lights are too bright. I remember hearing at a mental health talk, you can tell the old firefighter because he, won't go to concerts anymore, can't go out to restaurants because it's too loud, won't go to the grocery store during normal hours, because it's too loud and noisy. And I'm like, man, a lot of that stuff started resonating with me. And I'm like, when did this happen? Like it happened over a really long period of time, really slowly. And I didn't really notice it until the end when I started doing a lot of work. And I was like, man, I've been suffering from a lot of these things for a long time. We passed a law in Washington that made PTSD presumptive. And I went up to lobby for to go up to Olympia every year for our little ledge conference. And it was a novel idea. They were going to make the claims could be more than a single event. It could be multiple events, so over a career. And I remember going up there and I went and read the new DSM-5 at the library and looked at what PTSD was. And I thought, well, that could be everybody I work with, And I read there's a big list of like 17 signs and symptoms of PTSD. And there's two that didn't resonate with me. I don't have nightmares because I wasn't sleeping very good, and the suicidal ideation. But there's a little asterisk there because I had several people that I worked with commit suicide, and I'm like, well, out of the 17, I think have all of them at one point or another. Some of them sometimes brighter and sometimes not as much. And right before I retired, like right at the end, I maybe had like a month left. I had looked up the signs and symptoms of PTSD again and read through them. And I'd seen a lot of therapists, I'd done a lot of work. Nobody ever told me I had PTSD. I think everybody just assumed that I thought that I had it or I knew. And I remember I came to my wife and I go, I think maybe I have PTSD, and I hate that term. I got a lot of stigma with it. I didn't believe it. Some of my friends that had claims, and I just didn't get it until I got it. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of a monster if you don't deal with it. And alcohol was my go-to way to deal with it, but alcohol's borrowing happiness from tomorrow, and it works great until it doesn't. Then you'll just have, more problems. Alcohol's a pretty rough thing to have in your life every day. I wanted to not drink in retirement, so I think I've had about 2 years where I haven't drank, and it's so good, so good.
Yeah, I mean it's so ingrained in our culture, just to drink and when you catch yourself finally with that habit, you're like, whoa, like I didn't realize like every single day I was off shift, I was having an alcoholic beverage in my hand. And then we start to give ourselves like this awareness to like, holy shit, I have been drinking for a long time. And I think I had to deal with that. And it was tough, man, to just realize, okay, first of all, I'm gonna be honest with myself. I have been drinking for a long time. And it's been one of my coping mechanisms. So when I remove that from my system, it's like, okay, now I have to sit with myself. And that was what I was coping with, is not being able to sit with myself and give myself that skill. And that skill set is kind of what I want people to just challenge themselves with constantly, because it's so important. And it goes into like a road of self mastery with that one. But when if you suppress it for a long time, you pull layer after layer after layer. It's like it's a cosmic joke. It's like a clown who like gives you the handkerchief and he's just pulling it. He's just like constantly pulling. It's like, where does it end? But that's like the funny thing is like if you don't give yourself like that picture we just showed and presented, like you won't get to that little boy that's underneath you who's really hurting. And I always go back to this quote that my really good friend Maddie told me. He was like, dude, like PTSD is this unprocessed grief. That's all it is. And so we want to get to that little boy that's there. And that's where the healing journey starts. And the other part of pulling those layers back, that's just work. And that's just digging through those dishes of deep sorrow. And it can be a hard task to get to. But once you do get to the very bottom and you got this excavation skill to now get to, it's like you're getting to the well and you're getting to the real element of what's being presented with you. And now I want people to realize too, like to get there, man, it could take years. And there are some ways around that. There's skill sets, there's ways to get to that part of you. And I know Maddie was presented to me because he has gone on his own healing journey using psychedelics. And that's where I kind of want to shift this conversation around Matt's experience with that. And I had just over the years, psychedelic medicine has come up to on the podcast a lot because it's been so beneficial for first responders. And I wanted to kind of break that down before we start with Maddie's his healing journey, because what I've noticed, and this is from all different guests that we've had on using all different types of medicines, what we're seeing is there's this unarmored truth with ourselves individually, and that armor that we have placed around our hearts, around our consciousness, around our bodies. What happens is that armor goes up because we have to do a job, and in order for us to do a job efficiently, that armor has to get put up a little bit, because we need to act. We need to do things without emotion overcoming our experience. So that armor can be harmful for us because we become numb over the years. That hardened casing, that shell is not who we are. And so when you're going through troubles through relationships, that armor will show because you're not collaborating, you're not connecting with your spouse, you're not connecting with your children. So these are things that are harmful in real life. In real life experiences, that armor is not true. So what I want to explain is that unarmored truth exposes us how hardened we really are in real life. So when you peel back the layers of the armor, there is a vulnerable space there of being the protector and being this version of you who has been in charge for a very long time. So what happens is that part will fight every every inch and cranny of you to remove it because but once you do that, now that you've dethroned that part of yourself and it's not in charge anymore, now the king can sit on the throne and start making difficult decisions. Like, hey, I have to honor the fact that I'm fucking sad, and I'm just sad because I've suppressed it. And so that's where the work really comes through. But that's kind of like my introduction to what Maddie's going to talk about. So I'd love for you to talk about, brother. First, your your first approach with psychedelic medicine and that concept, because I know we talked about it over the phone and kind of like your perspective on it and how your belief systems have been keeping you from stepping into that path and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely identify with what you were saying about the armor, and I definitely built up a way to protect myself or take care of myself, and I was bothered by things, but I really wasn't sure what I was bothered about, or like I didn't know what thing was bothering me. It got to the point where bad calls didn't bother me, and then that bothered me, and I just had this really rigid set of thought patterns of how I thought the fire department was and who I was and how people interacted with me. And through psilocybin, I realized that I was misinterpreting almost on a daily basis. I was misinterpreting almost everything. I had really got at this negative mindset of the world around me. And, one big psilocybin journey, and I kind of came to the realization that I don't need to be competing with everybody. Everybody's not out to get me, and a lot of these thoughts that I had aren't true. And I don't know if I could have got there with talk therapy. I'd worked with several therapists over the years, and some were good and some were bad. Some I felt bad for because I traumatized them, telling them stories, and then they started crying, and I'm trying to comfort the therapist. I'm like, this isn't working. Maybe I just need to not talk about this with anybody. But yeah, the way psychedelics work, where you can really like see a different angle or version of things, and it's like a bad call. You can't forget it, and it might not be helpful day to day. That what you're doing isn't healthy, but you can't forget it. You've kind of seen behind the curtain, and you know that you don't have to be on guard all the time. You don't have to constantly be competing with everybody. Everybody's not out to get you. And for a long time, really didn't feel like I fit in at work, or that people liked me, and that wasn't true. It was all stuff I created in my head. And it can be a really thankless job being a firefighter too. Like you work your ass off, and then all you do is do better. Like no good fire goes unpunished with a PIA of what you could have done better. It's like even when you do a good job, they'll find something that you could have done better, and you could just get in that cycle of that rigid thought pattern. And psychedelics really helped me break out of that and kind of see, I think, what normal people, if there are any normal people out there, what they must view the world like. And it was pretty nice to not be stuck in that. And that was a real gift.
And so where did you go do you did psilocybin, you did like a hero dose, is that what you did?
Uh, so Oregon passed Measure 109 to legalize psilocybin services in Oregon. And right about that time, I was kind of on the way to retirement. Like, what am I going to do? And I'd always been big into foraging and picking wild mushrooms. And, there's always a fascination with psychedelics. And I'd maybe dabble a little bit in high school, but not much. And so I decided to go to school to be a facilitator. And like, that was the best gift I ever gave myself. I just figured I would help other people because I'd already tried to do therapy and fix myself. Like, that's a definition of spiritual bypassing. Like, I'll take care of everybody else instead of taking care of me. But
Mhm.
in the beginning of the program, they were like, well, you really need to do your own work before you can help anybody. And I'm like, well, I paid the money. I'm already here. So I really dove in. And through that program, it was right when the service centers opened. So we were one of the first groups to go through the legal service center in Oregon. And it was a pretty small dose. It was about 2.5 grams. And I think you can take 5 as the upper end. They do it in milligrams, but I still talk about it in grams. But then I went to a retreat in Mexico City where I did 6 grams, and it took me a long time to get comfortable to be ready to do that much. And I was really happy that I finally got there and got to experience it and see it. And it was a big group ceremony. And it was beautiful, and I just it sounds so woo-woo if you try to explain what happens in a psychedelic journey, because unless somebody's had that similar shared experience, you just kind of sound crazy. But it was it was probably one of the best days of my life. I remember in 2006 when that John Hopkins study came out on end of life, for cancer, people who were dying of cancer, and they did psilocybin. And one of the things I read in the article was that even a year later or months later, if they were still alive, that one psilocybin experience was in like the top 3 or 4 experiences of their entire life. And I thought, that's right up there with marriage, birth of kids, and like, that's a really important milestone. Like, if that's one of the biggest experiences of your life. And I got to experience that a couple times at the practicum here in Oregon and then in Mexico, and it was a really life-changing experience. And part of that life-changing experience was all of the intention setting before in the community, and all the talk and all the integration, and the friends that you meet. It's not the same if you would just go to the park and take some mushrooms by yourself. It was the whole package. And I didn't really understand it until I went to the really good retreat, a service center that was doing it right. Music is really important. Having an eye shade on so you're not distracted, and like, all those pieces put together were. I don't think talk therapy or medication would have ever got me there. It just gave me something to work with quickly, and it was a really great experience.
Well, I know, talking about like the idea of woo woo things, I like to shift that to quantum physics, because quantum physics seems much more logical and much more efficient when you're explaining things. And I think what happens when you lift the veil within yourself, you realize there's so many different versions of yourself. There's so many different aspects of the quantum field that's existing here and now in this moment in time. And so we are essentially this emerging kaleidoscope. It's always in flux, constantly. And so there's different layers of consciousness that are existing all at once at the same time. And those different layers are accessed from our field of existence. And this field is just like an electromagnetic frequency. And so what happens is when Matt is going to do this experience, he's not only accessing his own field, but the whole field of the room is also being accessed. So however many people are in that same room, they're all emerging into one giant, what chi masters will call it, a chi field. It's just information that's there. And so when you're going into a healing experience with a group, you guys are all healing together, and you're accessing this envelopment with just interwoven pieces of creation that's happening all at once. And when you're experiencing, once the veil is lifted, is you're getting to see what it's like without your own self-righteousness getting in the way. And so we can heal, with the lack of better term, to do some work on what's hiding beneath the surface. And what's hiding beneath the surface is just information. If we can see it as that information that's available to you that has been just kind of hiding within the cobwebs of the mind. And I know, I've heard so many different people on this podcast platform speak from their own personal experience, they have said, yeah, this is one of the most um, beautiful experiences I've ever had in my life, and I never would regret it, because it's given them like a second chance. And also their sense of spirituality emerges as well, because they get this feeling as if they're connected to it all once again. And specifically with psilocybin, it's been referred to as this connection to the mycelial network. And the world of fungi is accessing the mycelial network, as which our carbon organism, is also connected to a mycelial network. So psilocybin can medically shift neurons and neural pathways in the brain while you're processing information, because there's been a block around an idea or a concept, and you're emerging past the block. You're now moving neural pathways around a different viewpoint on the way you perceive reality, the way you identify with the truth of this earthly plane. And so I think it's interesting to kind of break it down like that. Hopefully that kind of like summarizes somewhat of your experience. But I think, what would you say was your, I guess, your heightened experiences when you went through this journey in Mexico, if you want to start there?
Well, I think one thing I didn't understand, it's a very Western way of taking care of yourself, to only go to the doctor when you're really sick, and you only do it by yourself. And the group work is so amazing, because you're with a bunch of strangers, and you might know somebody, but you kind of meet, and right off the bat, you tell each other everything. And that's a great, honest, open way to start some friendships. And then you get to hear everybody's story, and you realize that you're not alone, that other people are going through stuff too, because I kind of downplayed a lot of what I was going through. And come to find out, to listen to the stories and integration going around, like, everybody's dealing with very similar things. Guys fall in very predictable traps, and that group, the community and support, and just talking things over was so helpful, because there are certain things that would kind of resonate with multiple people, and you realize, that, yeah, I kind of saw that too. It almost kind of helps you figure out things for yourself, hearing other people's experience. And yeah, group work is amazing. I like it so much better than one-on-one. I think if anybody is going to try psilocybin, especially firefighter, I think group work would be the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, there's a stigma around psychedelic medicine as well. And just then, first and foremost, like, these are tools. It's not like this magic bullet. And it's really the beginning of your healing experience, is once you get the roadmap that's presented to you. Now that's where the work comes. You're like, okay, now I can see things that were hiding in my subconscious and that I've been suppressing. And so now it's like, okay, what do I do next? And I think that's really hard for people to understand. But that's what we call like integration. And integration is like a unified whole. And to bring the information you're processing into a perspective that's now within your current narrative is the hard part, because once you're now fitting pieces to the puzzle all together, sometimes those narratives don't match with parts of yourself that are still in resistance. And so now the work is coming with what part of you is resisting this new narrative from a personal experience you just had 3 weeks ago or whatever. And the work is kind of shifting around what that part of you is resisting, or why you can't accept this new narrative or this new summarization of what you've experienced. And I think that's where someone who like yourself, you're like a facilitator, that integration portion is so important. And what I want people to also see is like people will take medicine like this and take it further where they're lost in the medicine now. And I want people to also see like at some point you will outgrow the medicine because you've had the roadmap, and the real work is here in this reality. I love this one time this girl was just interviewing another person, and she was like, what's the hardest drug you ever took? And she said reality. Because it's
Yeah,
so true, man, you know?
yeah, yeah. I with with both of my big journeys, I hit a big pink cloud where I was, man, I'm enlightened and I'm fixed. And I love listening to people explain neuroplasticity because everybody explains it completely different. And I think some people are close, I think some people are off, but I think they can all agree on they kind of know how it works, but they're not sure why it works so good for so many people the way it does. But there is a there's a point where after a journey, and then you have to go home and you still have to work in the yard and do laundry, and like, well, I thought I'd be enlightened by now and just eating peeled grapes on a sunny hillside, but no, life catches up. And if you don't, like, the psychedelic experience at the retreat is probably like the least important part of the whole thing. It's what happens afterwards. Like, what you experience the day of the journey will change the next day and a week later and a month later. And I'm still unpacking stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, I made a little shift in how I thought about things. And you see people that are journeying a little bit too often, and there's no way they can catch up with trying to integrate what they've learned. So I think you have to be really careful about not declaring yourself healed while you're on the pink cloud, because these aren't just, unfortunately, you just can't take it and be fixed. We're not broken. We don't need to be fixed. We're just human. But um, I think people sometimes think that the psilocybin, especially, is just going to rewire their brain. Well, that's got to be great. It's all rewired and I'm going to be fixed. But after the experience, that's kind of when the work begins. It's like if you blow your back out and you go to physical therapy and you get the sheet with all the exercises on, you just leave it on the counter. You're probably not going to be as good as if you'd done the exercises. Integration and working with therapists and trying to figure out what you learned and integrating that into your life is where the real magic is. And then, being around people that have similar shared experience, especially, everybody that does group work, there's a signal or a chat and people are connected. Anytime I talk to one of the people that I was in one of those journeys with, it kind of brings it right back, it freshens it up. We connect, it's good, and it brings all those feelings back. Community and, sharing and being vulnerable, like that's really the medicine, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And because life becomes a ceremony after you start to see like have a perspective shift. Yeah, but you have to get to that point. Like, how do you show up in your life? How do you take your lessons from what you've learned into your relationship, into your relationship with your kids, and your relationship at work with those who are still working on the job? That's where it counts. And that's where like you have to watch yourself, because none of that even matters. It's just that you're just essentially having an experience. That's it. But the real work is how you embody it. And I want people just to understand embodiment. Embodiment is just it's a further point of integration where you don't have to tell your story any longer. Your presence speaks more than anything else. Where you can just go into any situation, any circumstance, and your nervous system is set. It's not dysregulated. You don't have your reactions. And enlightenment is such a far-fetched concept. I think we don't even understand what enlightenment is. I remember there's a story about a Zen master who had like a student, and this all it's like a joke on enlightenment. It's like the the student comes to the Zen master and he's like, "Hey, I've done all the meditation. I've done all these things on myself. How come I'm not enlightened yet?" And the Zen master pulls out a pot of tea and starts pouring it into a cup. And as he's pouring it, he's overflowing the cup. And the student has just yelling at the Zen master, like, "Stop, what are you doing?" And the Zen master just looks at him and says, "How can you be enlightened if you're just full of yourself?" And like that's like a very famous um, idea of enlightenment. Like our self righteousness is if you're still full of it, then you won't even touch the path of enlightenment. And they always say like too, like before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water.
I was waiting for a break because that's one of my favorites, you know. And
Yeah.
I came to that same realization too, and it was a real bitch because I I thought, man, like the work is never going to end, and it's been a couple years of really hard work, and it's not going to stop. I mean, uh, I just don't want to settle for a life that isn't as great as I think it could be, and I'm kind of seeing it's getting better and better, and I keep trying something different, combining things together, and you just have to constantly keep working. You're worth it, and just to keep turning over rocks, looking for what works for you. And not everybody's the same. Some people hate psilocybin. Some people love ayahuasca. I've never done ayahuasca and I have no desire to do it. There's breath work can be really, really amazing. And there's no drugs involved. You can get to, I did some holotropic breath work with somebody that did it for a living. And I was surprised. It was like a psychedelic experience. So there's all kinds of things you can try. Just keep trying something different if you're stuck. Like, try something else. If that didn't work, try something else. Like, if you just give up and stop, then you're going to be stuck right where you're at. And I think for somebody that's had a long career in the fire service and you're getting ready to retire, if you're not going to put some work into dealing with stuff, if you've never dealt with it your whole career, like, you're going to have a pretty big balloon payment of stuff to deal with eventually. And some people don't ever deal with it, or they drink, or they just keep themselves so busy doing. I mean, does this sound familiar? Like, so busy off duty, just exhausted coming back to work. Like, we vacation and play harder than we do at work. I mean, we just beat ourselves up, and there was just never a time to stop and reflect on anything. I was just so busy all the time.
Yeah, I mean it's a constant practice to not be busy. We're stuck in this dystopian world of dopamine where there's just so much out there. And I catch myself all the time, man. Like I'm at work and I want to just disassociate on my phone and I'm like just sucked in, and like even doing all of the stuff I have to do for the podcast, that sucks me in. I'm exhausted after. And I just have to manage that to just not need it. I know I have to do some things, but at the same time, the stimulation, it's so harmful, man. And it's a constant awareness thing that I have to make sure I'm integrating within myself. And I just had a really interesting conversation about integration with one of my mentors, and she was explaining that how check in with yourself all the time and check in and see how integrated you are with your body right now. Are you in your body at this time? Or are your thoughts just thinking about all these other things? Are you thinking about, your grocery list? Are you thinking about what you got to do tomorrow? And when you're in your body, it gives you like a fresh start of the day. And is your consciousness integrated into your heart? That's another version of how far I've gone in my life where I seek to have an intention of living in my heart, because that's another version of consciousness that's activated that doesn't exist off a linear timeline. It doesn't exist off logic. It exists off felt emotion. It exists off of how I have compassion for myself and others. And so is my consciousness integrated now with that space? Usually the answer is no, because it's a constant thing I got to work myself with. And is my consciousness activated with or integrated within my chi field? That's how far out I will go. And these are just different things I've done to accustom myself to with integration. And and this is because I've become a student of qigong and martial arts. So most martial arts in mastery, they know this stuff, and so they are effortless in their ways of doing martial arts, and it's just really it's a discipline, and it requires extreme focus and precision to integrate yourself and to integrate into your body and to integrate your consciousness. So some of that is a bit more advanced, but it's just a concept of how am I showing up right now? How am I showing up right here? Am I listening to my 11-year-old living at my house? She knows when I'm not listening to her. I'm not integrated. I'm worried about all these other things. And I was a master of disassociating all the time. Like I loved disassociating because I could just check out.
Yeah.
And the body is a barometer of what's really going on. So when pain shows up in my body, it shows, hey, I'm not integrating my body. I'm not listening to myself. And so everyone's got to modulate themselves appropriately to their integration of life. So I know you're facilitating psilocybin treatments now. Is that correct?
No, I think Oregon has cranked out, I don't know if it's 350 or 500 facilitators, and there's only so many service centers. And so
Mm.
there was no place that I wanted to work. And, there was so many facilitators. I haven't got my license yet. I might start working with a service center uh, next year that's going to be doing group work with firefighters, maybe like quarterly. I don't want to say who and where yet. I don't want to jinx it, but I'm pretty sure the first retreat's going to happen in February, and I think I'll be a part of that moving forward. I'm pretty stoked about that. I want to go back. You were talking about the phones and people being distracted. And one thing I realized towards the end of my career was just how, you think you're at work with a bunch of people and, you're communicating and social, but a guy can be having a really rough time. And it's so easy to hide at work.
Mm.
Like you almost wouldn't know because we don't ever actually talk to each other. Like the armor, or you just don't want to bring what's at home to work, and just being so distracted and dissociating all the time, especially at work. And then I think when that goes into retirement, I kind of thought, I was around people all the time and was being social and I was talking, but I thought, there's very few people at work that I was actually talking to about anything other than just, mundane trivia of the day. So I think it's really important to not get yourself too isolated emotionally, physically, spiritually. If you find yourself, if you're not sleeping and you're isolating yourself from everybody, you don't feel like doing anything, you should really take note of that.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how tight that group is at each individual firehouse. Like I know I've worked at so many different fire stations, and there is so many levels of superficial or superficialness that I would never have those deep conversations. But I have been to different assignments where I was really really connected with every single person. We had like a deep relationship where those conversations did start to happen. And
That,
actually, that's how I started the podcast, is because those
that's
conversations are so efficient.
when you love the people you're working with, it doesn't matter how bad the calls are or how many there are, you can do anything. But if there's a rift or you don't get along with somebody, those shifts are really, really long. Really long.
Oh, absolutely. And it definitely requires, it starts with one person who is open and who will have those conversations and stimulate those conversations. And that takes courage, man. Like there's so much shame with men to speak about like their truth, and there's so much vulnerability to that. But if you can have the confidence to express yourself in those ways, because we're constantly talking about all this other like fire department stuff and all these other little things that don't even matter. And once we go into a different wavelength where, you know, it helps someone else feel comfortable to talk about, hey, dude, I'm having so many issues at home right now. I'm on the struggle bus. Like those things are so important to just release. And if you
Yeah.
just bottle it up, it's gonna pop.
Yeah. If you're really struggling with something, if you just tell somebody what it is, it kind of takes away some of the power that it has.
Mm.
but just to tell somebody what's going on, because we don't do that. And the whole vulnerability thing, I'm not sure where in my journey with psychedelics I kind of was like, oh, I'm just going to be unapologetically vulnerable, and it's still like,
Mm.
even doing this podcast, there's a little voice in the back of my head saying, you don't need to do this. This isn't safe. This is, why are you doing this? This is just gonna, people are gonna criticize you, or people are gonna talk shit about you, but certain people aren't thinking about me, and they're not talking shit about me. And when I started being open and vulnerable and talking about things, and I picked the time and the place and the people, people really opened up, and people would tell me, they'd get something off their chest and they'd say, I've never told anybody that before, or like, never had a conversation like this at the firehouse. I'm like, yeah, it feels pretty good, doesn't it? Like, you can do this anytime, just call me, like, if you don't have anybody to talk to. And I really liked being that guy, and especially as a supervisor, to be not, I know everything, nothing bothers me, which is most leaders in the fire service. Just to be, honest and open and talk about, what's going on. It was pretty refreshing. People really warmed up to it. And then, the kitchen table conversations would be about anything, everything. And, I feel like when the older guys finally retire and the younger generation is taken over, they're much more willing to be open and talk about things. And I think that's going to be good, but it's going to take a while. But I started to see a shift towards the end of my career. The end of my career, nobody really knew who I was, because I think half of our department was hired in the last 2 years. And I was working with captains' kids that I saw running around the station, and half a lot of the people weren't born when I started working there, and you kind of get out of touch. But, that senior guy or that old guy really has a nice platform to maybe give that gift, or to tell, talk about stuff, or be open, be vulnerable. Like, you almost need to see somebody do it that you respect, that like gives you permission to do it. And there was a guy that I met through my training, and we went out and had a talk, and he was telling me this stuff, and I'm like, man, you just said all the things I've been thinking for years that I would have never told anybody. I'm like, it blew my mind. And I'm like, I want what that guy's got. And like, he was about maybe 6 months or a year ahead of me going down, some training with psychedelics. And I'm like, it was just the thing I needed to hear at the time from him. And yeah, it's just talking. I've spent a lot of time and money, and I've learned that you need to be around people and talk. I mean, if you're not being around people and talking, like, it's not as good as it could be, I think.
Yeah, I mean that's like I was saying earlier, like that's how this podcast started, was these conversations started to shift within myself and other people, and it was nerve-wracking to start a podcast to talk about some of these things, but as soon as we did it, like everyone was like, dude, I'm feeling all of those things. And when it came down to addiction, when it came down to like these other ways of coping that don't work, when it comes down to like your emotions and how you operating at home, like no one talks about how difficult that can be when you're coming home off shift and you got to be here now. Like that's such a strange world. Like you're going from 50-50 from this place of chaos, of death and like a underworld, and now you got to come home to kids, and like what goes on with that is so bizarre. But it takes a lot of effort, and it can be exhausting. And just having the honesty with all of it, it can be terrifying to speak about it because you feel alone. But that isolation, it's a version of isolation when you're in this state of like imprisonment within your own thoughts and your own experience. But when you start talking about it, you're like, wait, everyone else is feeling the same shit that I'm experiencing. And so, I'm so fortunate to have this platform and helping, people like yourself to just come on here and talk about like, dude, it's so interesting how we are so averse to speaking the truth and what's really going on underneath these layers of ourselves, and I just hope that that retirees can listen to this and be like, dude, I need help right now, And where does that help start? It really just starts with yourself. Make a rebuild a relationship with yourself. Please. That's one of the most important things. And when you come back to the core of who you are, that little boy, that picture we just put on, that's just curled up in a ball and just like afraid, like that's just that little boy just needs comfort and acknowledgement. That's all it is. And I think over time, that starts to create real growth and change within yourself. And people around you will notice it, man. That's the beauty of it. People start gravitating to that.
And I think the more you talk about it, just like talking about the work to home transition, like that's something everybody deals with. And for me, sometimes like the 10-minute walk home from work wasn't enough. And my
Mm.
wife's like, how come you got off work at 7? Why aren't you home? It's like 7:45, and I didn't have the words to try to explain. Like I need to decompress a little bit, and I think that the spouses or significant others really need to be a part of this conversation too, because they get the worst of us, and it can be really confusing, especially if you haven't taught them the language and they don't know the inside jokes or the acronyms. Like by the time you have a really bad call that you need to tell your wife about, if you haven't laid all the groundwork of what's the difference between an engine and a truck or a squad, like they will ask 1,000 questions and you trying to tell the story, you won't be able to get it out. So like, don't you're not protecting your family or significant others by not telling them. Like you need to tell them the language. You need to let them in. They want to be in, and they don't understand. Like you come home from work and you just did something crazy. Uh, at 3:34 in the morning, you haven't slept, and then you get home. It's like, well, what do you want to do today, or what do you want to have for breakfast? I'm like, I can't do anything. But if you could tell them what happened, if they would understand, you would probably feel better. You wouldn't have the anger and irritability, and just be like, the only thing I can do right now is lock myself in a room alone because I can control that. Like that's what I did. And yeah, I don't think any part of this healing journey, like you need to have your friends and family, and they need to understand what's going on with you. Like tell them, what's going on, because
Yeah. Yeah,
they
that
don't.
that concept of locking yourself in a room, I was guilty of that for a long time. And I just wanted to just shut everyone out. And then because it's a lot of people do it. And I think when I really caught myself with that was during the COVID in 2020. I did that a lot more. And I was already in isolation because no one wanted to hang out with me because I was exposed, right? That's what it was in the past. So but I definitely would shut my door and no one was available to see me or talk to me. And that was a pattern I had carried within myself because I think I would just feel bogged down and my whole system would just like it's tripping a breaker. Everything would just shut off.
That's your
And
way of trying to control something you don't have control over. If I eliminate everybody,
right.
then I'm in control of this. But like when you're all alone in your cave hiding, like there's not much support there. Like I've never found any support when I was isolating. It makes you feel worse. Yeah, I think don't isolate and don't forget to sleep. I think sleep deprivation is probably one of the biggest detriments. I didn't realize how bad it was. It's probably the best form of torture they've ever come up with to break a human, is just keep them awake for an extended period of time, and it just makes you crazy. And yeah, tell the people around you what's going on, that you need some sleep, or what's going on. Don't isolate.
Yeah, I mean the sleep conversation is so tough because I know specifically for LAFD, like I don't see that ever changing. And if it is, it's not anytime soon. Just because there's so much logistics and red tape and politics around changing a policy with something, it's really difficult. So like I have to give myself the opportunity to not waste my energy on things I can't control. And there's no way I'm going to control that concept. That's why if you give yourself more opportunity to help yourself get back into some form of balance, getting off shift with no sleep, I mean, that's the only thing you can do. So like doing certain things that are non-inflammatory, and doing the opposite of the stimulation, the constant stimulation is so valuable and so important. And I don't know how you guys work like 24, 48 hour shifts. How does your shift schedule work over there when you were working
Uh,
in Vancouver?
we do a D shift, so it's 24 on, 48 off, 24 on, and then 4 days off. But there's debit days. But if you have,
Hmm.
I think maybe 20 years, you can buy all the debit days. So it's one on, two off, one on, four off, and then each vacation day is a whole week, which is pretty nice. Um, in LA, do you count your retirement on final average salary over a certain number of years?
Yeah, there's
Because
different
that's
levels that it's changed over the years.
so everybody, I saw so many people get close to retirement. They're going to pad their retirement so they get more, and they work themselves to death at the end of the race, like just 48-hour shifts, 72, 96-hour shifts, and just people making insane amounts of money and working massive amounts of overtime. It's like never being home, just constantly being exhausted. I'm like, I don't think it's good. But when people see the dollar signs, I don't think they realize how much it's costing them. And I remember looking at some people and thinking, like, you missed your kids growing up because you were with me. Like, how can you be at work that much? Like, be careful how much you give to work, because if you do all this, get your final average salary, so you'll have this money when you're retired and your kids hate you and you're divorced, like, what's the point? Just pace yourself at the end. I think guys really push too hard at the end. I couldn't do it. I couldn't hardly work a double. I didn't want to. I did have to mandatory myself into a 96 right before I retired, but that was at that point you might as well just stay. But I don't think you would want me doing any math. You
No,
just
there's a lot of members who do that. They have this idea of what they want for retirement. They want to create this cash fund for themselves, and they will work 120 hours straight constantly, and they are never home. And so it's a very strange thing, but it's really a personal choice, like what you want to do. And like I just watch people crawl to the finish line, like their spinal cord is shaped like a question mark, and like their bodies are broken. And how are you going to enjoy this? And I always even tell younger members who are getting on the job, like, your youth, there's no price on that. So take advantage of your youth, and try to travel as much as you can before you do get further along your career, because that's a ticking time bomb with yourself. Your youth is, is so important. And don't get fixated on working all these hours. I see it all the time.
yeah, yeah. I wish there were some big trips that I wished I would have done when I was younger. And I traveled a lot, but you get to be a certain age, and the things that you were interested in then aren't interested anymore. So yeah, have some balance with, the work-life balance. I think is BS. Like, life is much more important than work. You know, have some
Absolutely.
have some balance.
So I did want to talk a little bit more before we ended this conversation about like your idea. How were you approached with the psilocybin experience? How did that come up for you? And then like, uh, what were your thoughts? Like, did you have like some resistance to it at first? And compared to that, after your experience, like, how would you merge those two?
Say the first part of that question again.
Like your idea around psychedelics, and like any resistance to it at first.
Well, I mentioned that study, that John Hopkins study, and I kind of became fascinated with it. And I read everything I could get my hands on. I went to all the psychedelics conferences, followed all the studies, and like I really studied it. But I hadn't ever really had any big doses. I mean, it took me a couple years to really warm up to the idea of it. And I've seen people. It can take a long time. You might decide you want to do it, but it took me a long time to be ready to do it, and it's a big thing. And some people, the some of the biggest, toughest guys I know that I thought would be like, that they would want to do this, they're like, no way, never opening that door. And
Mm.
it's so sad. I mean, I hope everybody that wants to try it can before they die, legally in a safe way. But some people are just not willing to open up that door. And I was really leery of, you know, seeing what's going to be there. I think that's the fear everybody has. What is it going to bring up? Because it's the ultimate, you don't have control.
Mm.
Like, you really can't deny psilocybin at a high dose. You're going to have an experience, and it's going to bring up what it brings up, and you don't get to pick what that is. And that can be a beautiful thing, because it might not have been the thing that you thought the problem was. I think a lot of people think it's work trauma, and in these group settings with firefighters, what I've seen a lot of times is that it's all wrapped up in childhood.
Mm.
And I remember hearing that firefighters get into the fire service because they want community, or they had a challenging childhood. And I'm like, it kind of seems like everybody I work with, but and the same in the military. And I was like, oh well, we all have challenging, or like we're geared for chaos, and we just really thrive in it. That's what makes us good firefighters. And like losing control and giving up to mushrooms with a bunch of people that you don't know at a retreat, like, it can be a big jump. And when I was in that program, I remember looking around, and people are talking about astrology and oracle cards, and I'm like, what did but I remember them saying, like, if you think the person that you're sitting across from doesn't have anything for you, or you don't really like them, like, they're the person you should probably talk to. Like, and I kind of really took that to heart. And I bought some crystals. I might have a tarot deck. I still don't, astrology doesn't make any sense to me, but like, don't be so rigid. Like, open yourself up. Like, what if this one psilocybin experience could shift your thought patterns in a way that you could live a better life, that happier, more content life. It's not such a bad thing. Yeah, it's scary, and you don't know what's going to happen, but you don't know what's going to happen day to day at the fire station when you go to work. But there's that fear is so ingrained, and like, people just, I was surprised by people that were like hard nosed, never doing it. And there's all that stigma that it's a drug. Like, everything you get from the pharmacy is a drug. Caffeine's a drug. Alcohol's a drug. There's a lot of really popular, socially acceptable drugs, but I think these have a lot of promise to take you where maybe therapy alone couldn't, or SSRIs couldn't. Not numbing yourself with Xanax and waking yourself up with Adderall and drinking and antidepressants. I mean, like, so many people are on so many medications, like, for long periods of time. I don't think we were meant to be on those meds for that long. And I don't know how to, other than doing what I'm doing right now by just talking about the experience, and hope that maybe somebody listens to me and can maybe identify with me as a firefighter and go, well, that guy did it, he doesn't seem too crazy, maybe I could do it. Maybe it gives me permission to think about wanting to try this, or maybe to talk to my wife about it. And that's really, like, I have a moral obligation, after I kind of learned and found out what I did, to share it with anybody that wants to listen. And I was kind of nervous about this podcast, because I always joke when I start talking about mushrooms or psychedelics, I could talk about it all day, and I'm like, what are we going to talk about for 2 hours? It's been going by pretty quick. Yeah.
Well, the only reason why I mentioned that is because I would say your generation, they went through this whole compilation of, say no to drugs. And that's when the Schedule Ones and the Schedule Twos, the Schedule Threes started coming out during like the Reagan administration. And like, that's when things kind of like were like, oh, this is bad. No. And like, they would get like a frying pan and like they would like fry like sausages on the frying pan. They would say, "You see this? This is your brain on psychedelics or whatever."
Yeah, I
And you
that
know what
like
I mean?
you'll be legally insane if you do LSD so many times. I had friends that were doing it, but the propaganda worked on me. I was terrified to do any kind of hard drugs. And, also in that generation, if you have sexual diabetes too, like we really had a double whammy. But yeah,
So that's kind of like what I was, saying for your generation. Like there's this falsehood, like concept on this belief system around medicine. Like I've heard this quote, like, um, half of what we call drugs or medicine, half of what we call medicine are drugs. And psilocybin is, in my opinion, I consider it a medicine because, and its addictive effects are little to none. And I'm talking to a lot of people too around these bigger medicines like that are coming out, like ibogaine. Like ibogaine's huge right now, and trying to legalize it and require more funding on what this medicine can really do because the way I've seen medicine is something that is bringing the mind, spirit, body connection into harmony. And so something like this psilocybin is allowing things to come back home to yourself. And it's merging all of these versions, these mind, body, spirit within one unit together when they could have been just shattered and fragmented within all these different versions that are just not being heard, not being felt, not being seen. And I think there's right now is a conversation piece that's just getting out of these old ways of thinking, getting out of these old concepts. And I mean, you're trailblazing your generation right now for having the courage to go out to face yourself. When in the end, when you do face yourself, I mean, I'm curious when you first faced yourself, I'm sure there is the fear of the unknown, but when you finally were there, it's like, holy shit, like there's this beautiful connection to myself. There's like, I can just feel like, why would I want to leave this space where I can just be with myself and like feel like I'm so connected to this world that I've just ignored.
yeah. Man, I had a really good point that I was listening to and I lost it. But you're thinking I should write something down. But I think with psilocybin and psychedelics, it's such a stigma about a drug, a bad drug, and I have some friends that are pretty conservative and very religious, and they're surprisingly the most interested in psychedelics, and I've been surprised, and it's been kind of nice because psychedelics is not the it's not the group that you think it would be. It's not a party drug, and it's a medicine or a tool, just like anything you get at the pharmacy. And I just hope someday it's not just looked at of, kind of tongue in cheek, rolling your eyes and, oh, they're doing psychedelics. But when you look at the amount of interest and money that's being spent at some of the leading colleges and universities in the United States, and there was tons of studies before everything got scheduled one in the 50s. I mean, these medications, these tools really do work, and they work really, really well for things that they still haven't figured out. I mean, like we don't have a good medication for depression, anxiety, and PTSD. There really isn't anything that works. It's just a mask. And I just hope that we can just be okay to use psilocybin if you want, where it's legal. It's legal here in Oregon. Um, you know, if you want to get some blank stares or kind of have fun, go to your supervisor or your union rep or city council or BC and say, hey, can I go to this psilocybin retreat? They won't know what to say. Well, it's a Schedule One drug, but it's not a fit for duty thing. You're going to do it once. It's out of your system in 24 hours. But there's been two studies I know of, or maybe three, in Washington and Oregon around psilocybin and firefighters and alcohol use disorder. It's an FDA breakthrough medication. One of them's being done at the VA, another one at a college in Washington. But is it okay for a firefighter to be enrolled in a clinical trial for psilocybin and alcohol use disorder? I mean, they can't even answer that question.
Hmm.
I mean, and Washington actually passed a kind of little mini bill to do a study for firefighters and first responders, but there's not there's no fire chief or department I know of in Washington that says yes, it's totally okay for our firefighters to go be in part of this clinical trial. Like, that question can't even be asked and answered. It would just be, I don't know. I mean, it's at a college, a legal clinical trial with a FDA approved breakthrough. Even the VA has gotten on board, and they're doing studies with it now. But and I was kind of confused, like, why wouldn't our local state council get on board and say, yeah, we support our guys being part of this trial, or we support our members using psychedelics in a safe, legal, clinical setting, but nobody wants to talk about it or touch it. And I just think it's going to take a long, long time. But the reluctance of people, because there's a lot of people that are into psychedelics, but they don't say anything because they're afraid of being stigmatized or judged, or losing their job. And so there's a lot of people quietly taking psychedelics at the fire departments because you hear them talk, but I don't know how we bridge that gap to, is it okay for you to go do psilocybin once in a state where it's legal for your mental health or alcohol use disorder, or like whatever? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, how come we can't get there? I've been stymied. Even the IAFF, they've been way behind. They won't touch it or say anything at all. I was just talking to somebody that they had a big IAFF mental health symposium, and the one thing they said was like, we got this new thing and it's going to be really great. It's transcendental meditation. I can't remember what year it was when IAFF came out and kind of formally recognized PTSD, but it hasn't been that long. And I think the states are going to kind of be fending for themselves with mental health peer support, unless they in the future. But
No, you're exactly correct. And I think the number one thing you had mentioned was it's a fear around it. And fear is it's really what's keeping people from speaking out about this. And there are a lot of underground members who are just doing their own healing and taking control of their own healing because they know all the red tape and all the policy and all the things that are going to keep them from getting there. So that's the cold hard truth with all of it. It's sad, man. I think it's really, really sad. And especially, I work for a very large department. We have, 4,000 plus members. And I would say 80%, 80 to 90% of them, they do their own, they take care of their own stuff on their own. Like, none of them want to even go near workers' comp when it comes to their body. None of them want to go through any of this stuff because they know it doesn't work. They know the dead ends. They know all the red tape. And for someone who wants to go on a journey within themselves with a medicine like psychedelic medicine, right? They know that there's a potential that some person who doesn't understand it can get angry out of their own volition and fire you. That's the fear. And so they want to protect their pension. They want to protect their livelihood. They got a family to feed at home. They got a house payment to pay for. So that's really where the fear comes. And I think once we understand like that we're under this vice of control and this vice of putting you as like this good soldier, you're under this component of fear because you answer to me when it comes down to the city you work for or the department you work for, the agency. That's really what's happening. And I want people just to feel that for a second. Just that concept is keeping the next person from not being depressed or from being even more depressed, or their addictions going off even further. And I work in a field where, we try to help on our behavioral health team all these people, but we're only helping people who are at the bottom of the pit with their addictions. And now we got to send them off to some organization that's going to get them clean, and that cycle is going to keep repeating itself. There's not much help with the legal side of what we're seeing within organizations. It's really sad, man. I've seen so many stories over the years, and I just I just have my heart goes out to all these people because it's an endless system that's broken. And so I think psychedelic medicine introducing the idea takes courage. And it takes a lot of courage because you're breaking old paradigms, people who don't want to change.
Yeah,
And it sucks.
I didn't tell anybody that I was, a few people close to me knew because I couldn't stop talking about it, in certain settings, but I didn't want to ask a question that I didn't know the answer to. And I didn't want to put somebody in a position where they felt like they needed to take this to HR because they heard about me doing this thing and I
Mm.
was going to do it anyway. And I think you're right on with like, don't count on workers' comp and don't wait for your insurance. Like if you want to do an alternative trauma treatment like psilocybin, and firefighters have a hard time. I talk to them about how much it costs, and not that I'm working at a service center. Like, well, I can't afford that. I'm like, you got two snowmobiles, you got three motorcycles, you got an RV in the front yard. Like, take control of your situation and maybe sell one motorcycle and get the treatment that you want where you want to get it. And who can do psilocybin for mental health? Well, anybody over 21 that doesn't have the red flags to be excluded for certain past medical history or medication. So you don't need anybody's permission, and psilocybin's in your system for 24 hours. And like, take control of your life. If you want to do this, don't wait for insurance to pay for it, or don't wait for a scholarship for 2 years to go to some retreat out of the country. Like, just be your own best advocate and do your own research. I just really believe in that. Nobody is gonna be looking out for your best interest. Like, just go and take care of yourself.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I definitely believe in that, man. It's no one's gonna take care of you better than you. And in the end, like if you really want it, you'll get it. It just depends how desperate you really are. And most of us, even the human condition is built on how much we want to suffer till we want to change. And that's just the bottom line to it. I mean, I can raise my hand and say the same thing. Like there's no way I would have changed. There's no way unless there was some type of catastrophic event that would have shifted me. And it's exactly what happened. And so I speak from experience with that. But the whole thing is like, we don't want you to get to that point. Everyone that's involved with behavioral health or mental health has hit rock bottom, and they stand as a beacon of light to teach you and to tell you, hey, don't do what I did. You don't have to go there. And for people who just want to be stubborn with it, they want to hit rock bottom because they don't want to change their behaviors. They don't want to change their habits. And so that's really where it revolves around. It revolves around individuality on how far you want to keep continuing the same cycles within yourself. And that's really what it comes down to, especially for people in our line of work, you know. And I just want to offer that wisdom to others to just when they hear this, like, man, there will come a time in your life where you're faced with a decision. And that decision can be now if you want to do that change or create that change in your life. So you don't get to that point of being in rock bottom. So, but being a rock bottom, man, it doesn't feel good. And I can speak from experience. It does not feel freaking good where you you don't have options anymore. And that desperation will push you to the edge. And yeah, it's no fun.
Yeah, I kind of came to a point where I had I had kind of hit like a rock bottom with just being unhappy in my situation. And then I think most guys, if they're comfortable, they're not going to make any big changes until they have to. And then when they have to, because they have no other choice, they'll put everything they have into it and like obsess over taking care of it. And yeah, that was me. And I think I'd like to suggest to everybody that's listening that maybe you don't have to be at rock bottom to use psychedelics to improve your life. They've been used for thousands of years by a lot of different people to, like as a rite of passage and to enhance their lives and make it better. And I think maybe doing some preventative reflection and maybe trying some of these alternative trauma treatments before you're at rock bottom might be pretty smart. I wished I had done it sooner. I wished I hadn't waited so long. I wished I wasn't fearful of what I would find out, because once you get over, you kind of give into the experience. It gets easier, but I wish I'd have done it sooner. And I wish I could go back and do some group work with firefighters I was working with 20 years ago. And I wish we were more open about talking about stuff instead of like, here, have another beer. We're not talking about, no shop talk, like if someone's bothering you, want to talk about it, but don't. Here, just have another beer. I wish that I could have done, some group work with some of those guys, and maybe, a couple of guys that committed suicide, maybe they'd still be here if it was okay to be open and vulnerable and talk about stuff. And if they'd even known that psilocybin was an option, or ketamine, or, on and on. Don't wait till you're broken. If you want to do this and you believe in it, do your research and do it. You don't hear a lot of people say, man, I got into psilocybin mushrooms and my life has been shit ever since. I've gone downhill and it's just never been the same. I wish I had done more. I wish I could go back and had done it earlier, been intentional about it. I wish I had known somebody. I wish I'd been able to listen to a podcast and hear somebody talk like this. Maybe it had given me permission to try it earlier, but I felt like I was doing something wrong. I was at Intertrek going through that facilitation class, and I'm a battalion chief, and I'm like, I don't see any other battalion chiefs here. And I would go to the MAPS conference, and it was the first responders and vets, and it was the focus, and they had this big dinner and everything, and that was the two MAPS 4 years ago. There was like 6 firefighters that I met. That was it. And I'm like, where is everybody that's interested in this? And I just don't think there's anybody that's outspoken about it. And I'm like, well, okay, I'll be outspoken. And yeah, I love it.
Yeah, man. Well, like I was saying, like it takes real courage to be the person that's going to trailblaze against an old paradigm and the old ways of doing things. And that's that's where it's at. In my opinion, anyone who's gonna stand up against the tide and rise up with as a beacon of light for a new path that's available for, especially in your generation to as well. So I do have some people who are in your generation who hear this, and give themselves an opportunity to give themselves permission, like you had hoped for. Like you had that same experience, but that's the beautiful part, that you're doing it, man. That's the cool thing about, just being the version of retiree who just chose psilocybin as his path.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I remember I kind of came out a couple different times, like publicly, and I wasn't sure how it would be received or what, but everybody has been really like curious and encouraging, and I haven't had anybody really be like, that's irresponsible. You shouldn't have done that. I don't believe in it. Like, what the hell are you doing? Like, so probably all the stigma and pushback that you think you're going to get probably isn't there. And, I went and testified in Olympia for a Senate bill to legalize psilocybin in Washington like they did in Oregon. And when you sit down at a microphone, you have somebody signing for you, and have like, I was told I had like 2 minutes and I had 90 seconds. Like, that was really putting myself out there and saying I'm a retired battalion chief and we should be able to do psychedelics. But man, it felt so good, and I got such good positive feedback from everybody. Like, it's one of the only bipartisan things right now. Republicans and Democrats agree that vets should be able to do psychedelics as maybe a way to stem the, suicide epidemic. The same epidemic in the fire service, but I don't think we even know. There's no way we even know the numbers, because some people don't report it. The family doesn't want to know, and
Right.
there's so many fire departments. But I think the stigma and pushback that you're worried about, I've been met with nothing but encouragement and curiosity, and start having conversations with people. Or if you want to get some blank stares, ask somebody from HR if you can do psychedelics. I don't know.
Well, that's great, brother. I just want to close with that, and thank you for doing what you do, man. It's amazing to hear everyone's individual journey. They're so different, but very similar at the same time. And it's just it's an honor to have you on, and to have someone who's done 30 years and who's doing their own healing journey. It's amazing. So thank you, brother, for your time and coming on the podcast, man.
Yeah, and if anybody out there wants to talk to me, I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. And if my name's on the podcast, I had given my phone number out way too many times, and it's the same number, so I'm pretty easy to get hold of.
Yeah, we'll put your accolades and your contact stuff on the episode description stuff. But thank you, man. I appreciate it. And
Yeah,
everyone who's listening, thank you.
thanks.
All right, guys. That's it. I love you guys. Take care.